Hey everyone, welcome to Evolution as Genetic Change. This video is going to cover three types of graphs called stabilizing, directional, and disruptive. We're going to look at how those populations are going to shift over time depending on the natural selection pressures that exist on the population. Your goal is to be able to recognize what these graphs look like and kind of be able to tell the story or tell me an example of what type of graph you will see within the population here. So just as a background, natural selection is going to be the single most determining factor on a population change over time. So I do want to say that not all populations are going to be evolving. There are going to be some populations that stay consistent for hundreds and hundreds of years. And this is called genetic equilibrium. This is when we find that the population that exists is maintaining those same phenotypes or physical appearances over an extended period of time, and therefore their genes are remaining the same over a period of time. So the example that we have here is the butterfly community. Let's say that this butterfly community lived in a space where there were both red and blue flowers. Chances are both the red and blue butterflies are going to stay the same. Now, if a member of a population is more likely to survive, like if we are in a field of only blue flowers and no red ones, then which individuals are we going to see thrive? The blue ones. The red ones are likely going to be eaten by birds because they're going to stick out like a sore thumb. So natural selection is only going to affect which individuals are going to survive and reproduce, and then ultimately change the population in the long run. So I want to make a big clarifying statement here. Evolution does not happen to the individual. Evolution happens to the population and the genes within the population. So let's look at this a little bit closer here. If we have a population of butterflies and we have 50% of them as blue and 50% of them as red, that is going to possibly shift in an environment where we only have blue flowers. Over time, those red butterflies are probably going to be eaten by birds, just kind of like how the white moths were eaten when the Industrial Revolution started with the peppered moth lab that we talked about last week or a couple weeks ago. So here we end up seeing that the red butterflies are eaten, and so now the only ones that are left are the two blue. So while we started out with 4 butterflies and 2 of them were blue, so that's 50% blue, in the end, now we're going to have 100% blue butterfly population. So this right now is not genetic equilibrium, but instead evolution. We are changing the population's genes over time. In the beginning, we had 50% blue, and now in the end, we have 100% blue. That is change over time. That is evolution. So that previous example was only for one gene. So we're looking at you are either blue or you are red. You aren't purple, you're not spots. It's one or the other. We know that our world isn't necessarily that black and white. We have a lot of variation that exists. For humans, that variation can be skin color, it can be height, it can be muscle density. There's a lot of diversity in between those two extremes. So that is called a multiple allele or a polygenic trait. We're not going to worry about differentiating between those two here. So fitness, or how well an organism can survive an environment, is going to depend once again on its phenotype. But I want you guys to remember that there is a big scale here. It's not just like the black moths or the white moths. Now we're getting a lot more in betweens. So there are 3 types of graphs that we can use to look at this. There is directional selection, there is stabilizing selection, and disruptive selection. Now, I have an example down here of mice of varying fur colors. They all have white bellies, but their backs and the tops of their heads tend to be different. We have a few light-colored fur mice, and we have a few dark-colored fur mice, but a majority of the mice that we are going to be seeing exist in this medium area. And we see the same exact trend for humans. There are a lot of humans that are like average height. There are very few humans that are super, super, super tall or super short. We see the same thing when it comes to eye color. We see a lot of like brown eyes and very few of like the very contrast opposites. And same with human skin color. We see a lot of people that are like tan or somewhere in between, and not as many people on those extremes. And so that kind of spells out this nice little bell curve when we look at how many people in a population exist with those certain traits. So, directional selection. I want you guys to be looking at this dotted line here first. This is the original population. Now we're going to use mouse fur color just because we can change the environment, and mice do get eaten by a lot of predators, whereas humans don't. So in the beginning, we have very few mice with the very light fur color, very few mice with a very dark fur color, and there's a ton of mice in that middle ground. So directional selection, I'm going to go back to this, is when this graph shifts from that medium point towards one of the extremes. So when an extreme version of a trait makes the organism more fit. In this case, the intermediate or that middle trait and the opposite trait tend to be selected against. So in directional selection, we are favoring one extreme. Only one extreme, and that's going to be important later on. So if we have these mice and there's a lot of variation in fur color, well, we're going to see that if a mouse is living on really dark soil, the lighter ones and the tan ones are going to stick out. So that's going to cause the population to shift towards the darker fur color mice. All of the light and tan mice are being eaten on this really dark surface. And so over time, we should expect the mouse population to get darker and darker and darker. The next population graph, once again, we can see we're starting out with the original bell curve. So we have a majority of the population is that intermediate. Now, stabilizing selection is when the extremes are both selected against, and that middle or intermediate is the best. It is best suited for the environment. So it favors those organisms in the middle or the average. Once again, we have our nice little bell curve. We're starting out with very few light mice, very few dark mice, a ton of tan mice. And over time, if they are living in a sandy area with a lot of tan soil, we would expect the light and the dark mice to be eaten and the tan mice doing better survival-wise. So in stabilizing selection, both extremes are eaten, and the population is going to increase for the intermediate or average traits. And finally, we have disruptive selection. This is probably one of the hardest. You may have heard the term disruptive before when it comes to your classmates. If you've got someone that always likes to talk out all the time, they could be called disruptive. Disruptive means to disturb or to undo the typical or the norm. So what we end up seeing here is when this bell curve is completely split in half. It no longer has that nice, beautiful bell shape. This is going to happen when that tan or average or intermediate fur color is completely erased. So looking here, we've got very few white mice, very few tan mice, very few dark mice. If these in the middle are eaten because let's say that we're in an environment where we have only light and dark rocks but no tan rocks at all, then the light mice are going to be able to hide on the light rocks and the dark mice are going to be able to hide on the dark rocks, and the tan mice are going to stick out like a sore thumb because they don't have anywhere to hide. So in this case, we're favoring both extremes, but the middle is going to be eliminated. So we end up with a weird like camel's back graph. This original line here is that like solid red one, and over time that tan mouse is eaten and we end up having a spike in the light mice and in the dark mice. So this is disruptive selection. We're seeing both extremes being beneficial here. So let's work through a few examples before you start doing your check for understanding for today. Over on the left-hand side, we see directional selection. Once again, we're always going to start out with that typical bell curve of not very many of the extremes and a lot of the intermediates. So in this example, long wiggly tails look like snake and scare predators. The longer the tail, the more it looks like a snake. So this is going to be directional selection because the longer the tail, the better it is. It's moving towards one extreme here. For the second, once again, we have short, medium, and long tails. Short tails mess up the cat's balance. Long tails drag on the ground. Medium tails are the best. This is going to be stabilizing selection because we are selecting for the intermediate or the medium one. Too short, it's going to mess up the balance. Too long, it's going to drag on the ground. The medium is the best. And for the last is disruptive selection. Short tails can keep predators from catching you on the ground. Long tails are good for balance in the trees. Medium tails don't help. So because medium tails do not help, those are going to be eliminated from the population, whereas the short tails and the long tails are going to increase. This is disruptive selection. We see the intermediates decrease and the extremes increase. So now let's go ahead and do our Schoology check-in. For the rest of this video, I'm just going to be reading through the scenarios. Feel free to go ahead and do that on your own. The answer choices may not be in the correct order, but the questions are. Question number 1. If thick-shelled oysters are tougher to crack open than thinner-shelled oysters, crabs will have a harder time eating them, and thick-shelled oysters will be more likely to survive and reproduce. Hint, the harder the shell, the better. Is this directional, disruptive, or stabilizing selection? 2. Very light-colored or very dark-colored oysters might be more frequently eaten by shorebirds because they're easier to spot from above. Hint, medium color is the best. Is this directional, disruptive, or stabilizing selection? Light-colored crayfish are hard for a predator to see because they match the rock color. Dark-colored crayfish blend into the shadows cast by the rocks. Intermediate colors would be eaten most often. Hint, light and dark are best. What type of selection is this? Is it directional, disruptive, or stabilizing? On Daphne Major, one of the Galapagos Islands, lived many different-sized finches. After a severe drought, only large, hard seeds were left, and all the birds with small beaks died of starvation. Hint, the bigger the beak, the better. What type of selection? Directional, disruptive, or stabilizing? In a species of bird, males with really colorful feathers attract the females, and really dull coloration helps the males camouflage from predators. Males with medium coloration aren't selected for by females. Hint, medium color is bad. Is this directional, disruptive, or stabilizing? Female robins can lay anywhere from 1 to 10 eggs. Laying too few eggs runs the risk of them all getting eaten. Laying too many eggs results in underfed chicks. Most robins will lay 4 to 5 eggs. Hint, median eggs is the best. Is this directional, disruptive, or stabilizing? In sunflowers, being too short means not getting enough sunlight, and growing too tall means getting blown around by the wind. Medium height sunflowers tend to survive best. Hint, medium height is best. Is this directional, disruptive, or stabilizing? Frogs with longer tongues are able to catch more food. Frogs with short tongues can't catch as much food and usually don't survive. Hint, the longer the tongue, the better. Is this directional, disruptive, or stabilizing? Okay, and that is it. I hope you guys have a wonderful day and that you are all staying safe and healthy out there. Bye.